Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm excited to have Emily Madden joining me, and also Nick Moriarty's joining me. She's helping me with the interview today, which is great. For those who don't know, Nick's one of our associated authors of Global Girls Online, and she's the author of her latest book is You Need to Know. So welcome Nick and welcome Emily. Emily's a contemporary and historical fiction author. Her love of books started at a young age and would often go shopping with her mother just so she could score yet another novel. Nothing has changed. She rarely leaves a bookstore without a book. Emily lives in Sydney with her two girls and husband. She loves coffee and is forever frequenting her local coffee haunts. She has an unnatural obsession with needing to be close to the ocean, but is terrified of deep water. And her latest book is The Buchanan Girls. If I can show that without it disappearing. And just want to mention, I finished reading The Buchanan Girls in the weekend and absolutely loved it. I probably read it in 2 days, I'd say. It's the second of your books I've read. I also read The Lost Pearls, I think, before we did our interview last time. And both of your books have been 5 stars for me. So really, really totally recommend them. So thanks, Emily, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's quite exciting.
And just wondering if maybe you want to start off by telling us a bit about the Buchanan Girls.
The Buchanan Girls is a dual timeline. So it's set in 1940 Australia during the Second World War, and present day, or kind of present day. It's set in 2008. So it's in essence, it's a story about forgiveness, and we've followed the story in the past with the twin sisters Ivy and Olive, who are the Buchanan Girls, and they're identical twins, but they have very different goals in life. Olive is engaged to a corporal in the Australian Army, and her sole goal is to marry her fiance before he heads off to war. Whereas Ivy feels like her purpose is different and she wants more. And we come into the story in 1940 in 1940s, and in 1941, just before the Pearl Harbor attack, and just after the Pearl Harbor attack. And this is when the threat of war and the threat of the Japanese invasion to Australia was probably growing. And so in seeing this, Ivy really wants to do something. So what she does is she joins the Australian Women's Army Service, and she does so against her father's wishes. And so the story follows the journey of how she grows, and it's her, I guess it's, she's doing her bit for her country, and in doing so she falls in love, and it shows the differences between the two sisters and what they want out of their lives. And then in the present, we are, I guess we see a woman, Madeline, who comes home from, she's been living in New York for about 8 years, and she comes home nursing a broken heart, and it's all about her story and her journey as well, because she doesn't know she's at a crossroads. She doesn't know what her future will hold, and it is through her time back home and through her grandmother's I guess encouragement that she makes her decisions. So at the core of the story, it is about forgiveness, but it's also a love story, and at times a quite bittersweet one.
Mm-hmm. And could you tell us a little bit about what the first idea was you had for the book?
Really, the first idea is the Asylum that features in the book was probably the first idea. The book is actually set in the present day. The book is set in a part of Sydney that in Gladesville, and the asylum is on the site that used to be the Gladesville mental hospital, which now is a school for special needs kids. So, that's in the present, but in the past we actually see the asylum, and this is how. That was sort of the core, like this is where I got the first idea for the book. I was fascinated with the history of the asylum, and just now, it's part of a school. Some of the buildings of the asylum are part of the school. So that's where I guess the idea for the book came from. And then I knew that I wanted to set another book in around the Second World War, and needed to set it. And when I was researching the Lost Pearl, I came across the Australian Women's Army Service, and wanted to showcase these incredible women who were really ahead of their time. Their whole purpose of the AWAS was to free up men who were in Australia to fight on the front line. But in doing so, they were taking on roles that were very male dominant, very much nothing like what women in that time period were permitted to do. And so these women not only took on these roles, but excelled in these roles. And so I thought it was, and it's not something that I guess when we think about the Second World War and Australia's war effort that you hear a lot about. So I really wanted to showcase these wonderful women. So that's essentially where the ideas came from, and then meshing the ideas and building a story around it.
Were there any specific women that you came across when you were researching those women? Any specific women that were the inspiration for your characters, or were your characters just completely fictional and imagied? That's a good question. I think there's in my core characters, I've got a few core characters, and I think those women are an amalgamation of a lot of the women that I read about. Unfortunately, because the Second World War is now, you don't find a lot of people who are alive, and now that were part of the Second World War. So a lot of the research is done through transcripts, or I spent quite a bit of time at the War Memorial in the library there, and that has an immense amount of information. So in reading about them, I think you form your characters around the different people that you read about. So you want to make it authentic. So when you build the character, you want to make it representative of the people who were who were in the Australian Women's Army Service. So I hope in doing so that, the characters that I've built are, pretty close to what the women who actually were part of the AWAS.
And I found the part about the asylum really interesting as well. Was it easy to find information about that? And maybe like people who'd been in the asylum?
I didn't talk to anyone who was a former patient, but I said, the site of the asylum is now, as I said, it's now a school. It's a school that one of my children attends, and so from the very first time that she actually started going to the school, I was fascinated with these. It is very eerie. There's some buildings in that section, because the thing is, the school occupies a few of the buildings, but there are a lot of abandoned buildings around. So just talking to, there's a couple of parents who knew quite a bit about the history of the buildings. I did find a lot of information online. I've walked through some of the buildings, and I really wanted to do a more deep tour, but because of COVID and the time that I was researching, a lot of those things weren't allowed. But one thing that I found also fascinating when I was doing my research around the school is the asylum was built on the banks of the Parramatta River, on this little part, a little bay called Bedlam Bay. Now that I thought was quite fitting, that an asylum was built
in a site that was called Bedlam Bay, and it was just, I thought, you know, this is just amazing. I've got it. I don't even have to make up these names. These names are already there.
Too interesting to pass up.
Exactly. Yeah.
Are there any ghost stories around that?
Yeah.
Based on its eerie past?
Well, it's what I'm not surprised. I wasn't surprised to discover that it is actually one of the most haunted sites in the country. But just talking, I have been to as I said, I've been to the school and just the area in the evening. So it is quite eerie. But there are a few staff members who actually swear that that there are movements and things that they see. So yeah. So but it didn't actually surprise me when I was doing my research to discover that it is quite a well-known supernatural site.
And we've got quite a few people watching, which is great, and got some questions coming through. So Wendy's wondering if your own children have taken up your love for books that you said you had. I'm also wondering if maybe you could tell us some books they might be reading if they have.
Unfortunately, no.
They have.
I try. Look, you know, I guess, you know, having teenagers, a lot of their time is spent reading books for school. One of my girls, actually, she really likes paranormal. So she quite likes that. I guess the genre. But and then I have a friend who is a writer in Scotland who writes under Scarlett Wilson. Susan Wilson, Scarlett Wilson, but also Susan Wilson, and a lot of her books, which so she writes a lot of YA, and so she quite likes her books, and because they're paranormal and anything paranormal captures her attention. So, and for me, anything she reads is a bonus. Yeah.
And Yvonne said that her auntie was actually in the asylum, and she realises now that she most likely had postnatal depression.
Yeah, and that's something that was very common. One of the things that I also found in researching was that throughout the site there's about 1,000 or 1,200 unmarked graves of people who were. It had a pretty gruesome history, and I think postnatal depression was very much just a stock standard reason for people to be committed. And one of the other things that I found really disturbing was that how easily people were committed, and then how hard it was for them to leave. So when I wrote the part, there was, you know, the part about one of my characters being taken or put into the asylum. It wasn't much of a stretch because those things happened, and they happen quite often.
Very scary.
And Sarah's wondering, she said that she can see you've got a fuzzy bookground behind you. So she's wondering what sort of books you like reading, and if there's anything you might be able to recommend to us.
I read when I have the time. I read a real wide range of books. I most recently finished actually and listened to a lot of audiobooks. So one of the most recent ones I just finished was The Paper Palace by Miranda Cowley Heller, and I really enjoyed that. Another book that I've most recently, not that long ago, read is The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. And Simone St. James also writes, she writes dual timelines as well, but hers are quite, and have a very paranormal thread. And it was only by accident that I found her, and just the way she writes is very clever. So I'd like to read more as well, but so when I have the time, I read anything really. There's not really a genre that I wouldn't give a go.
Do you have a preference between audio books and reading them?
I do like reading. Reading really, is as you know, when I started the first audiobook I listened to, I did only because I had a quite long commute that I had to do, and so I was like, well, I need something. So I started listening to audio, and at first I was resistant to it because I was like, well, I don't want someone reading to me. I'm not a child, but it's actually I really enjoy audio right now, and I'll alter between fiction and non-fiction for audio, but for some reason when I read fiction only. I don't read non-fiction, but I will listen to it. But my first preference is reading, paperback.
Yep.
Yeah, I was a little bit, like you said, a bit resistant for audiobooks, but now I find it's good to do when you can't actually read a physical book. So if you're doing some housework or driving somewhere or something, it's a good way to
Handy for
keep up with all the-
multitasking.
yeah,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
keep up with your huge to-be read list.
Yes. It's one way to get through it.
Yeah.
Can I ask another question, or have you got some coming through that you need to ask?
Ask away.
Okay. I wanted to know, because I take my hat off to you being historical fiction writer. I wouldn't even know where to start when it comes with the research. So I'm curious how long it takes you to research a book like that, and what the time spent researching is like in comparison to your time spent writing.
A lot.
Yep.
It depends. The thing is, I would love to just jump in and start writing the book, but you really need to. What I find is that I need to understand the time, the place, and you need to know the lay of the land before you start writing a historical book. With the Buchanan Girls, I was quite lucky because I'd already written a book set in the Second World War before, so I kind of like had a bit of a head start. But when I did it for the very first time, I was writing about the lead up to the Pearl Harbor attack in 1940s Honolulu. So I had to do a lot of research, and for the law school, I was really lucky because I found a woman who used to be a tour guide in Hawaii, and her specialty was a tour of 1940s Honolulu. So I found her. I was able, and this was obviously before COVID times. I went to Hawaii and I spent some time with her, and she just literally took me through and said, okay, so this used to be, she all these big, like these key landmarks and things that you can research in books, but or by the internet, but it was by being on the ground and talking to people, and that's how I understood. And you find these little gems. So I guess I spend quite a bit of time up front doing the research for the historical element, and there is a reason why I write dual timeline, because I find the writing historical, that takes a lot of research. So imagine you had to write a full historical. So I cheat a bit, so I can go backwards and forwards between the past and present. So it's in terms of the actual length of time. I might start and do a couple of months of research up front, just so I can get started. But as I'm going through, I might find that I need to stop and do more research as well. Yeah.
And have you found sometimes, like, you're researching for one book and then you find all this other branch out to all this other information you didn't know and think, oh, that's going to be great for my next book?
Yeah, you always earmark things and bookmark it for later, and that's what I did with for the Buchanan Girls, because the Australian Women's Army Service obviously didn't fit into the Lost Pearl, because the Lost Pearl, majority of it was set in Hawaii. There was some that was in Sydney in the Second World War, but that wasn't really war related in terms of the character. Wasn't a soldier or anyone in the army. So when I was researching for
for that book, and I came across the Australian Women's Army Service, you think, okay, this is really interesting. I'm gonna earmark this for later. And actually, that's how I also got a bit of an idea for Heart of the Cross, my second book, my second historical book, but my third book, and where I was researching about life in Sydney and got this really interesting idea. So you always find that your research actually, if you can't use it now, you kind of like, you hold on to it so you can possibly use it down the track.
Yeah. And can you tell us what you're working on at the moment?
I am trying to research a book that is set in around the time of the Vietnam War, but set in Vietnam, Las Vegas, and Karratha. And I can't go to any of them. I can't go to any of these places to do research. So I'm doing a lot of desk research. So I'm actually contemplating for the very first time, because when I write a book, I tend to write chronologically. So I'll start in terms of, when I say chronological, I mean the way a reader would read it. So I'll start and then I'll alter between the past and the present when I write. For the very first time, because it's taken me so long to research, I'm thinking I might actually just write the present thread to the book and then go in and weave the past through it. But that's cheating. I should be a little bit more committed and actually do the upfront research so I can write the book the way I normally write.
I don't know if it's cheating though. I think desperate times call for desperate measures. I think you can do what you have to do to get by, and then if you eventually get to go there, even better.
You can overlay the knowledge on top. Yeah,
but who knows when travel will be allowed again.
Who knows? I might get to go to Vegas before I can get to go to Karratha.
Yeah. And sorry.
No, I'll just say then. So that's my next project, or my current project, really.
No, that sounds interesting as well, and a little bit of a different timeline. Because all your other ones World War II, or is Heart of the Cross different?
Heart of the Cross is more early 50s, or starts around the early 50s. It's not really focused on any war time, but really quite post Second World War. Yeah.
And have you been to Vietnam?
No, I haven't. It was something that was earmarked as a trip last year, but obviously that didn't happen. So I've just, for that particular one, that's where it's probably quite important to talk to people who have lived through the experience.
And Happy Valley Books, they wonder if you read a lot of historical fiction yourself.
I do a little bit, but it really depends. If I'm actually, it's weird because when I'm writing, when I'm caught up in the writing process, I tend not to read the genre that I'm writing in. So I'll read something else, something completely different. I don't know. I feel like I just need a break from history when I'm reading. So when I'm not writing, I will. I probably tend to read historical fiction then.
And Mary wonders if there's any authors who give you inspiration.
Oh, every single Australian author gives me inspiration. I think we are as a collective. I think Australian authors are very inspiring. There are so many that I'm lucky enough to have met and call my friends and to learn from. And there's a lot that you admire as well. So I think, and in terms of, if I think about a lot of the books that I've read over the past couple of years, 80 or 90% of them would be Australian authors.
Yeah. And MJ says there are many historical fiction books in recent years that use dual timelines, past and present, as a tool for telling a story. Why do you think this method is becoming so popular?
I have no idea, but I can tell you that it's something that I've probably enjoyed reading from when I was a kid. I remember I may have been about 9 or 10, and I read Playing BT Both by Ruth Park, and that has a dual timeline element to it, and it's something that I've always been drawn to. I think for me, I really enjoy writing the dual timeline because you are unfurling a secret from the past through the present, and I think it's through that journey and through that backwards and forwards, I guess, between the past and present, that slow unraveling of the secret. For me, that journey and even writing it is exciting. Because I map up my book from the beginning, because I do have to go between the past and present. And when I'm writing my outlines, I get quite excited when I go, oh, okay, and in this next section, this is you're going to give the reader another piece of the puzzle. So it could be that you have that backwards and forwards action between the past and the present, and your and there's always a part where both the past and the present will intersect, and that's when I guess the wealth of, or the most of the puzzle is unveiled. So it could be that excitement factor. For me, I just really enjoy dual timelines, and I even watched the Jojo Moyes the movie that was based on her book, The Last Letter from Your Lover, and that has, even watching it as a movie, I enjoyed the same way as I would read it. It's quite just a fascinating way to enjoy a story.
I'd say as a reader myself, I certainly enjoy dual timelines a lot more than just the straight one. Historical fiction, I think it brings a little bit extra to it.
Yeah, it gives you the chance as well to feel, if you're reading something like historical fiction, to also feel a part of the story or a familiarity of the story when you get into that timeline that's closer to current day.
Yeah.
I'm interested, if it's okay to throw in another question, about your pathway to becoming a writer and to publication. I think I find often readers and aspiring writers as well always like to hear that story of how you first became a writer and how you first got published.
I think I always wanted, it's quite cliche to say, I've always wanted to be a writer, but it's true. I think, from when I started developing a love of books, I wanted to write. I guess you grow up and people tell you that writing is not a real job.
Yeah.
They tell you that often. So I guess you then go into a career. And for me, how it happened is one of my I was a situation where I had to stop working to look after one of my children, and in that time period I also discovered that I'm not very good not doing something, and that I needed to use my brain. And so I thought, okay, well, I like writing. I like reading. I've always wanted to write a book, so let's I'll have a go at that. So I did. In the process, I also joined the Romance Writers of Australia, and found a very supportive writing community. And when you meet like-minded people, you are inspired, and so you think, okay, well, if anything, I've met some great people here, and I've developed some great friendships. But when I did finally write one book, I submitted it to a digital publisher who said, oh, look, it's okay, but it's probably not for us. But if you write something else, please feel free to submit that to us too. So I did, and then they said, "Oh, look, we think this would actually work really well in print. Do you mind if we send it to our print department?" And I said, "Well, of course," thinking nothing would come out of it. And then probably about a couple of months later, I got an email from Harlequin saying that they wanted to buy my book. And I think if I read the title of the email, I would have understood what they were trying to say to me. But I actually had to read. I read almost like pages and pages something, and then got to the bottom and said, "Oh, and we would like to publish your book." And I remember I was really sick. I had really bad. I had been sick with the flu for like a week, and then reading that, it was just like it was unbelievable. I can still remember that day. So that was and the book that I wrote first. My very first book was a complete contemporary fiction book called Summers with Juliet. So I wrote that, and then decided that I wanted to write dual timelines. So the Buchanan Girls is now my fourth book, and my third historical fiction contemporary fiction book.
Yep. Would you ever go back to the straight contemporary fiction, or you feel like you found your place with the historical fiction and the dual timeline? That's where
I think I never say never, I guess, but if I think about the book that I'm writing now and the book that I have in my mind for my next book, they're both dual timelines. So I really enjoy writing dual timelines. So I think this is my thing.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to know, what was your career before you started writing?
I'm still doing it. I went back to it, so
Okay.
I'm juggling both. I work in consumer research, so yeah. So I when I wrote the first book and when I wrote the second book, I literally was only writing, and then went, you know what? I actually miss being in an office, so went back to that. And now, guess what? I'm working completely from home. So and then also writing at the same time. So yeah, it's very much a juggle, but I quite enjoy the challenge.
So how do you try and structure your day to try and fit time in for everything? Or
yeah, you have to, because otherwise it will take me like 5 years to finish writing a book. You have to be more disciplined, I think. You can't just say I'm really tired now. Just have to make the time.
Yeah, I can't imagine trying to fit in work as well as the kind of books you write where you have to research. I find that amazing. Well done. I feel very lazy right now.
No, I'm just crazy, that's all.
And Cindy's wondering if you have a favourite character in your newest novel.
There was one character okay, I have two favourite characters. So I have one of my favourite characters in the book is called Lucy, and she's just an amazing little girl. But there's also another character that I stole from my previous book, because I was so sad to and the funny thing is, this is set before that book, so I just didn't have enough of him in one book, so I had to put him in this book as well. So yeah, and his name is Jack. But in terms of who in this particular book is my favourite character, I have to say it's probably Lucy.
Yeah, she was good. Yeah, she was nice. And if you could be one of the characters in your book, of any of your books, which one for a day, what would you choose?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, and I have to say I've not even thought of being one of my characters. But do you know what? If I could be one of them, it's probably Ivy Buchanan, because I just think just being a woman in the 1940s in Australia and having such a important role in the war effort, I think that was amazing. So yeah, I have to say Ivy.
What about the woman on the front cover of The Lost Pearl? Because I always see that, like, I've seen that book cover plenty of times, you know, bookshops or on social media. And I always, for some reason, you know, even though I know better, I know that that's not you, but I picture her face when I see your name. Is she somebody that would be, I don't know who she is in the book, so I don't know if she would be a character you'd want to be.
Yeah, she is another really strong woman who really, I guess if I think of it now, that I've kind of like modeled my one of my characters on a previous character, also was quite a little bit ahead of her time, and had a bit of a habit of going against what her parents wanted to do. And she was very Catherine Bennett, it was her name, and or Catherine McGarry, she was at the beginning of the book, and she was definitely another really strong. I like writing about women who don't fit the mold in the time period that they're in, because you know, a little bit of rebellion, and I think that makes for very much of an interesting character, but an interesting book as well.
Yeah.
And Geraldine wonders if you always know before you start writing how the book's going to end.
I generally do. One of the things that I need to know when I start writing a book is how I'm going to start it. I'll take a step back. What the title is. I can't start a book that I don't know what the title is. I need to know how it's going to start and how it's going to end. With not so much the Buchanan Girls, but with The Heart of the Cross, I actually even had the last line written, and I knew exactly what the last line was going to be. The journey to the last line, that was a different. I guess I just didn't know what the journey was going to be, which is really really weird as a writer. You start writing, and it's almost like these characters, they write them. I don't want to say they write themselves, but there are at times they do write the story themselves. And then there's people that come into the story that you didn't plan to come into the story, or people that you had as you know, you wanted to give them a tiny little secondary role in it, and they end up overtaking it, becoming a whole lot bigger than you anticipated.
And because you said you have to know your title before you get started, have your titles always stayed the same then all the way through, or have they ever been changed?
With they pretty much have. The Lost Pearl, for a while they changed the title, but then it came back to its original title, and I was so happy when that happened. So I was like, yes, because that's what it was originally known as. But every other title has pretty much from the beginning stayed the same.
And that final line stayed the same as well that you had planned?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it did. With the Buchanan Girls, I actually rewrote a large part of it twice. So the ending actually did change with this particular book, and the way in which when I say the ending changed, the ending was always going to be kind of the same, but the way in which I got to the ending changed twice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, twice.
And Geraldine wonders, if you could choose one of your books to be made as a movie, what one do you think would be best for that?
Oh, I always think that, you know, any book that's set in the Second World War is going to be a very expensive movie to make.
Yeah.
But if I had to, it's probably, I mean, like, the Buchanan Girls would be a great one, but then then in your mind you think, okay, who would play these main characters? And I would need a set of twins to play. So that then you start actually thinking about logistics when you shouldn't be thinking about logistics. So I think either the Buchanan Girls or actually any of the books. I think, you know, Heart of the Cross would be a really interesting one to have as a movie, because it's set in King's Cross in the 1950s and 60s. And 80s, like it goes 50s, 60s, you know, some of the 70s and into the 80s. And I think that would be really fascinating to see.
And I have to say, what a beautiful cover. Just showing the cover again for everybody. All of your books, I think, have had really beautiful covers. Were the girls on here as you imagined them?
Very close, I have to say. Out of all the character, when you write a character, I think, you know, when you see the cover, you hope that it reflects the character that you had in mind. And I think for the Buchanan Girls, that was pretty. I have to say, they were pretty close. Yeah.
That must be amazing when you see it, and that's how you feel as well.
Yeah.
And MJ's got a good question about the characters' names. She wonders how you decide your characters' names, and does the name come before the story, or do you retrospectively decide the character sounds like an Olive or an Ivy? Or
yeah, with the sisters, I had Olive and Ivy as the Buchanan Girls. Every other character, I think I possibly changed their name multiple times. I have, you know, a character in there called Madeline, and I have a child called Madeline, and she forced me to use her name. She made me promise to use her name in one of my stories, and so I actually put a Madeline in the book, and she said, you cannot call her Maddie, she must be Madeline. And I'm like, okay. But every other time, I think every other character I probably changed multiple times. I think my main character, in the historical sense, that I always have, you know, I don't think I've ever changed them, but it's more the secondary and the smaller characters that I probably do change.
And I'm wondering what you hope readers will love about the Buchanan Girls.
Oh, I really hope that, you know, it gives, you know, one of the things that's I guess difficult right now is you know, being in 14 weeks of lockdown. So I hope that, you know, one of the things that people get out of it is if they are in you know, in New South Wales or in Victoria, that it gives them a bit of a break from the I guess the unfun times that we find ourselves in. But I think it's just more about, I really hope that it does, you know, shed some light on, you know, on the Australian Women's Army Service and, you know, these wonderful women. I know I've said that like 1,000 times, but it's really, I'm really passionate about people understanding that, you know, that these women were amazing, and everything, in all my research. And if you go to the War Memorial, and there is actually a section dedicated to these women. And we often hear about the nurses and a lot of, you know, women who were part of the war effort. So it's really good to, you know, and I think in the last couple of years, we've seen a whole lot more recognition for women in their part in the war effort. So I just hope that, you know, just it gives them a little bit of a, I guess, you know, that they learn something new that they didn't know, and also that it gives them, you know, a story that they can relate to and enjoy.
I bet it would be a good escape. I know I'm looking for anything to take me out of Sydney at the moment.
Yep.
Can I ask what advice you have for other writers out there, or people trying to get started as writers, or if there's anything specific that you've learnt as a writer that you would want other people to know?
Good question. I think, you know, one of the things that lots of other writers, or one thing that, you know, that a lot of people will say to you is write what you love. And I think that's, with me, it's a dual timeline. So, and one of the other things that I've learnt along the journey is that not everyone's going to love what you write, and that's okay, because, you know, we're all different. And I think, you know, you if you understand that, you know, as long as you connect with, you know, if only one person connects with your book, then you've made one person's, you know, day, or, you know, one person's you know, you've brightened someone's day. So yeah, it's for me, you know, the I guess the best writing advice is just to follow your heart and write what you love.
Because I think then you'll love writing and it doesn't become a chore. And there are times when writing is very much a chore.
Yep.
As you would know.
Yes, absolutely. No, that's nice advice. I like it.
And I'm wondering, over these last couple of years, have you found writing harder or easier?
Oh, it's just different, I think. With the Buchanan Girls, because it was written, it took me the longest time to write, only because I think, the concept I had for the book at the beginning, I just kept changing that concept. So from book to book, it's just a different journey. And I think you find that with each book you learn more, you learn different ways to approach problems. So from that respect, from a problem solving respect, it becomes easier. But then there's other challenges that present themselves in writing. So you always have to. There's always different challenges that you have to navigate. So you think that once you write that first book, that everything else, that writing, it's going to become so much easier. But really, it's almost like every new book. Yes, you carry the knowledge from the previous book, but there are things that you need to navigate each time.
On that next book, you've got the expectation as well of having done it once before and having to follow up and do it again.
Yes, definitely. And you always think, when I'm in the midst of writing one book, I think, that next book looks so much easier to do, and it's going to be so much easier to write. And then you get to that next book and you go, actually, no.
And do you feel a bit of pressure that the next one and the next one has to be better and better? And
yeah, you do. You want each new book to be better than the one before. That's the goal, really, isn't it?
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Did you have any more questions, Nick, before we finish off?
I'm good. That was great.
Yeah, been great chatting to you, and we had some great questions coming from the people watching.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks, Nick, for coming along. It was great to have a tag team effort, and you can't see, but I do have. Which one's this? Oh, this is
yeah.
And I've got other ones that are on my to be read list. So yeah, thanks for coming along, and thank you to all the readers and listeners who asked some really great questions tonight.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us for the second time. Hopefully we can have you back again.
Yes, it'll be great.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.